Several days after the Jean Dooley episode, I was coming out of the subway at Washington Square when a thin blonde kid walked up to me. "Bill," he said, "I guess you don't know who I am. I've been scoring off you through Nick and I'm tired of having him steal the head off my caps. Can't you take care of me directly?" I thought, what the hell, after Jean Dooley, why get particular? "Okay, kid," I said, "how many do you want?" He gave me $4. "Let's take a walk," I said, and started towards 6th Avenue. I had 2 caps in my hand and waited for one of the empty streets you hit in a city. Empty spaces you hit in a city. "Get ready to stop," I said, and dropped the caps in his hands. I made a meet with him for the next day in Washington Square, Bickford's. This blonde kid's name was Chris. I heard from Nick that his folks had money and he lived in an allowance from home. When I met him the next day in Bickford's, he immediately began to give me the let me warn you about Nick routine. Nick is followed all the time now. You know yourself when a guy is vening. He doesn't look behind him, he's running. So you see who you picked out to give your address and phone number to? "I know all about that," I said. Chris pretended to be hurt. "Well, I hope you know what you're doing. Now, listen, this is not a routine. I'm positively getting a check from my aunt this afternoon. Look at this." He pulled a telegram from his pocket. I glanced at it. There was some vague reference to a check. He went on explaining about the check. As he talked, he kept putting his hand on my arm and gazing earnestly into my face. I felt I couldn't stand any more of this sweet con. To cut him short, I handed him one cap before he could put it on me for 2 or 3. Next day he showed up with $1.80. He didn't say anything about the check, and so it went. He came up short, or not at all. He was always about to get money from his aunt or his mother-in-law or somebody. These stories he documented with letters and telegrams. He got to be almost as much of a drag as Jean Dooley. Another prized customer was Marvin, part-time waiter in a village nightclub. He was always unshaved and dirty looking. He had only one shirt, which he washed every week or so and dried out on the radiator. The final touch was that he wore no socks. I used to deliver stuff to his room, a dirty furnished room in a red brick house on Jane Street. I figured it was better to deliver to his place than to meet him anywhere else. Some people are allergic to junk. One time I delivered a cap to Marvin and he took a shot. I was looking out the window. It's nerve-wracking to watch someone probe for a vein. And then I turned around and I noticed his dropper was full of blood. He had passed out and the blood had run back into the dropper. I called to Nick and he pulled the needle out and slapped Marvin with a wet towel. He came around partly and muttered something. "I guess he's okay," I said. "Let's cut." He looked like a corpse slumped there on the dirty unmade bed, was his limp arm stretched out, a drop of blood slowly gathering at the elbow. As we walked downstairs, Nick told me about that Marvin had been after him for my address. "Listen," I said, "if you give it to him, you can find yourself a new connection. One thing I don't need is somebody dying in my apartment." Nick looked hurt. "Of course I won't give him your address." "What about Dooley?" "I don't know how he got the address, I swear I don't." Along with these bums, I picked up a couple of good customers. One day I ran into Bert, a character I knew from my Engelbar. Bert was known as a muscle man. He was a heavy-set, round-faced, deceptively soft-looking young man who specialized in strong-arm routines and shakes. I never knew him to use anything but weed, and I was surprised when he asked me if I was holding any junk. I told him yes, I was pushing junk, and he bought 10 caps. I found out he'd been hooked for about 6 months. Through Bert I met another customer. This was Louis, a very handsome type with a waxy complexion, delicate features, and a silky black moustache. He looked like an 1890 portrait. Louis was a pretty fair thief and was generally well-heeled. When he asked for credit, which was seldom, he always made good the next day. Sometimes he brought around a watch or a suit instead of cash, which was all right with me. I picked up a $50 watch from him for 5 caps. Pushing junk is a constant strain on the nerves. Sooner or later you get the copper jitters, and everybody looks like a cop. People moving about in the subway seem to be edging closer so they can grab you before you have a chance to throw away the junk. Dooley came around every day, impudent, demanding, insufferable. Usually he had some new bulletin on the Nick Rogers situation. He didn't mind letting me know that he was in constant touch with Rogers. "Rogers is shrewd, but he's corny," Tony told me. "He keeps saying, 'I don't care about you damn junkies. I'm after the guys who make money out of it. When we find Nick, he's gonna think. He opened up for me once. He'll do it again.'" Chris kept pending me for credit, whining and pawing at me and talking about the money he was going to have for sure in a few days or a few hours. Nick looked harried and desperate. I guess he didn't waste any money on food. He looked like the terminal stages of some wasting disease. When I delivered to Marvin, I looked at death before he took his shot. I knew he would die from junk sooner or later, and I didn't want to be around when it happened. On top of all this, I was just barely scraping by. The short counts we kept getting from the wholesaler, the constant nibbles of credit, and customers coming up 25, 50, or even $1 short, plus my own habit, cut profits into bare subsistence. When I complained about the wholesaler, Bill Gaines got snappish and said I ought to cut the stuff more. You're giving a better cap than anyone in New York City. Nobody sells 16% stuff on the street. If your customers don't like it, they can take their business to Walgreens. We kept moving our uptown meats from one cafeteria to another. It doesn't take the manager long to spot a bookie or a junk pusher. There was about 6 regular uptown customers now, and that means quite a lot of traffic, so we kept moving. Tony's bar still gave me the horrors. One day it was raining very hard, and I was on my way to Tony's about half an hour later. Ray, the young Italian hipster, stuck his head out the door of the restaurant and called me over. It was a lunch counter with booths on both along one wall. We sat down at a booth and I ordered tea. There's an agent outside in a white trench coat, Ray told me. He followed me over here from Tony's and I'm afraid to go out. The table was made of tube metal and Ray showed me, guiding my hand under the table, where there was an open end to one of the tubes. I sold him 2 caps. He wrapped them in a paper napkin and stuffed the napkin into the tube. I'm going out clean first in case I get a shake, he said. I drank my cup of tea and thanked him for the information and left ahead of him. I had the stuff in a package of cigarettes and was ready to throw it in the water-filled gutter. Sure enough, there was a burly young man in a white trench coat standing in a doorway. When he saw me, he started sauntering up the street ahead of me. Then he turned a corner, waiting for me to walk past so he could fall in behind. I turned and ran back in the opposite direction. When I reached 6th Avenue, he was about 50 feet behind me. I vaulted the subway turnstile and shoved the cigarette package into the space at the side of a gun machine. I ran down one level and got a train up to the square. Bill Gaines was sitting at a table in the cafeteria. He was wearing one stolen overcoat, another lay on his lap. He looked sly and unsatisfied. Old Bart was there, and an unemployed cab driver named Kelly who hung around 42nd Street and sometimes picked up a few dollars peddling condoms, and with a routine of hitting commuters for 50 cents, which is one variety of a short gun. I told him about the agent, and old Bart went down to pick up the stuff. Gaines looked annoyed and said pettishly, "For God's sake, watch whose money you pick up. If I hadn't picked up Ray's money, I'd be on my way to the federal building." "Well, be careful." We waited around for Bart, and Kelly began telling a long story about how he told off a guard in the Tombs. Bart was back soon with the stuff. He reported that a guy with a white trench coat was still walking around on the station platform. I gave Bart 2 caps under the table. Gaines and I walked over to the room to take a shot. "Really?" he said. "I'm going to have to tell Bart I can't carry him any longer." Gaines lived in a cheap rooming house in the West 40s. He opened the door to his room. "You wait here," he said. "I'm going to get my works." Like most junkies, he kept his works and caps stashed somewhere outside the room. He came back with the works and we both took a shot. Gaines was aware of his talent for invisibility, and at times he felt the need for holding himself together so he would at least have enough flesh to put a needle in. At these times he would assemble all his claims to reality. Now he began rummaging around the bureau and brought out a worn manila envelope. He showed me a discharge from Annapolis. For the good of the service, an old dirty letter from my friend the captain, a card to the Masons, and a card to the Knights of Columbus. "Every little bit helps," he said, indicating these credentials. He sat for a few minutes silent and reflective. Then he smiled. "Just a victim of circumstances," he said. He stood up and carefully put away his envelope. "I've almost burned down all the pawn shops in New York. You don't mind pawning these coats for me, do you?" After that, things got worse and worse. One day the hotel clerk stopped me in the lobby. "I don't know how to say this," he said, "but there's something wrong about the people who come up to your room. I used to be in illegitimate business myself years ago. I just wanted to warn you to be careful. You know, all calls come through the office. I heard one this morning and it was pretty obvious. If someone else had been at the switchboard. So be careful and tell these people to watch what they say over the phone. The call he referred to was Dooley's. That morning he called me up. I want to see you, he yelled. I'm sick. I'll be over right away. I could feel Federals moving steadily closer. It was a question of time. I did not trust any of the village customers, and I was convinced that at least one of them was a trank stool pigeon. Dooley was my number one suspect, with Nick running a very close second, and Chris trailing in third place. Of course, there was always a possibility that Marvin might take the easy way of raising money to buy a pair of socks. Nick also scored for some respectable working people in the village who indulged in an occasional joy bang. This type of person is a bad security risk because of timidity. They are afraid of the police. They are afraid of losing their responsible jobs. It does not occur to them that there is anything wrong about giving information to the law. Of course, they will not come forward with information because of their fear of being involved, but they will generally spill under police questioning. Narcotics agents operate largely with the aid of informers. The usual routine is to grab someone with junk on him, then let him stew in jail until he is good and sick. Then comes the spiel. We can get you 5 years for possession. On the other hand, you can walk out of here right now. The decision is up to you. If you work with us, we can give you a good deal. For one thing, you'll have plenty of junk and pocket money. That is, if you deliver. Take a few minutes to think it over. The agent takes out a few caps and puts them on the table. This is like pouring a glass of ice water in front of a man dying of thirst. Why don't you pick them up? Now you're being sensible. The first man we want to get is... Some of them don't need to be pressured. Junk and pocket money is all they want, and they don't care how they get it. The new pigeon is given marked money and sent out to make a buy. When the pigeon makes a buy with this money, the agents close in right away to make the arrest. It is essential to make the arrest before the peddler has a chance to change the marked money. The agents have the marked money that bought the junk, and the junk it bought. If the case is important enough, the pigeon may be called upon to testify. Of course, once he appears in court and testifies, the pigeon is known to the trade and no one will serve him. Unless the agents want to send him to another town, some specially able pigeons go on tour. His informing career is finished. Sooner or later, the peddlers get wise to a pigeon and the pigeon can't score. When this happens, his usefulness to the agents is at an end, and they usually turn him in. Often he ends up doing more time than anybody he sent up. In the case of young kids who would be no use as full-time pigeons, the procedure is different. The agent may come on with the old cop con. I hate to send a young kid like you away. Sure, you made a mistake. That can happen to anybody. Now listen, I'm going to give you a break, but you'll have to cooperate with us. Otherwise I won't be able to help you. Or else I'll just belt him in the mouth and say, where did you get it? With lots of people, that's all it takes. You can find an example of every type of informer, overt or potential, among any customers. After the hotel clerk spoke to me, I moved to another hotel and then registered under another name. I stopped going to the village and shifted all the village customers to Uptown Meats. When I told Gaines what the hotel clerk said to me and how lucky we were, where he happened to be a right guy, he said, "We've got to pack in. We can't last with this crowd." "Well," I said, "they're up there now waiting for us in front of the automat. The whole lot of them. Shall we go today?" "Yes, I'm going to Lexington for the cure and I need bus fare. I'm leaving tonight." As soon as we got inside of the meet, Dooley broke from the others and ran up to us at full speed, pulling off a 2-ton sports jacket. He was wearing some sort of sandals or slippers. "Give me 4 caps for this coat," he said. "I've been in the can 24 hours. Dooley's sick was an unnerving sight. The envelope of the personality was gone, dissolved by his junk-hungry cells, viscera and cells, galvanized into loathsome instant-like activity, seemed on the point of breaking through the surface. His face was blurred, unrecognizable, at the same time shrunken and tumescent. Gaines gave Dooley 2 caps and took the coat. "I'll give you 2 more tonight," he said, "right here at 9 o'clock. Izzy, who'd be standing by silent, had been looking at Dooley with disgust. "Holy Jesus," he said. "Sandals!" The others swarmed around, holding out their hands like a crowd of Asiatic beggars. None of them had any money. I said, "No credit," and we started walking down the street. They followed us, whining and clutching at our sleeves. "Just 1 cap." I said no and kept on walking. One after the other they fell away. We walked down in the subway and told Izzy we were packing in. Geez, he said, I don't blame you. Sandals? Izzy bought 6 caps and we gave 2 caps to old Bart, who was going out to Rikers for the 30-day cure. Bill Gaines was examining the sports coat with a practiced eye. It should bring $10 easy, he said. I know a tailor who will sew up this rip for me. One pocket was slightly torn. Where did he get it? He claims from Brooks Brothers, but he's the kind of guy who would say anything he stole came from Brooks Brothers or Abercrombie and Fitch. It's too bad, said Gaines, smiling. My bus leaves at 6. I won't be able to give him the other 2 caps I promised. Don't worry about it. He's into us for a double Swarovski. He is? Well, then it doesn't make any difference. Bill Gaines left for Lexington, and I started for Texas in my car. I had a 16,000 of junk with me. I figured this was enough to taper off. I had a reduction schedule carefully worked out. It was supposed to take 12 days. I had the junk in solution and in another bottle of distilled water. Every time I took a dropper of solution out to use it, I put the same amount of distilled water in the junk solution bottle. Eventually I would be shooting plain water. This method is known to all junkies. A variation of it is known as the Chinese cure, which is carried out with a hop and Wampole's tonic. After a few weeks, you find yourself drinking Wampole's tonic. 4 days later in Cincinnati, I was out of junk and immobilized. I had never known one of these self-administered reduction cures to work. You find reasons to make each shot an exception that calls for a little extra junk. Finally, the junk is all gone and you still have your habit. I left the car in storage and took a train to Lexington. I did not have the papers that are required for admittance, but I was relying on my army discharge to get me in. When I got to Lexington, I took a taxi out to the hospital, several miles from the town. We reached the gatehouse of the hospital. In the gatehouse was an old Irish guard. He looked at my army discharge. Are you addicted to the use of habit-forming drugs? I said yes. Well, sit down. He pointed to a bench. He called them to the main building. No papers. Got an army discharge. He looked over from the phone. You ever been here before? He asked. I said no. He said he hasn't been here before. The guard hung up. A car will be down for you in a few minutes, he told me. Have you got drugs or needles or droppers on your person? You can surrender them here, but if you take them up to the main building, you are liable to prosecution for introducing contraband articles into a government reservation. I've got nothing. After a short wait, a car came down to the gate and drove me up to the main building. A heavy barred iron door opened automatically to let the car in, then closed after it. The polite guard took my addiction history. You're doing a sensible thing to come here, he told me. There's one man in here now who spent every Christmas for the past 25 years locked up somewhere. I checked my clothes into a blanket and took a shower. The next step was a physical examination. I had to wait about 15 minutes for the doctor. The doctor apologized for keeping me waiting, gave me a physical examination, and took my addiction history. His manner was courteous and efficient. He listened to my addiction story, interrupting with the occasional comment or question. When I mentioned buying junk by the quarter ounce, he smiled and said, "Selling some of it to keep up the habit, eh?" Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "As you know," he said, "you can leave here on 24 hours' notice. Some people leave after 10 days and stay off permanently. Some stay 6 months and go back 2 days after they get out. But statistically speaking, the longer you stay, the better chance you have of staying off. The procedure here is more or less impersonal. The cure lasts about 8 or 10 days, depending on severity of addiction. You can put on that dressing gown now." He pointed to pajamas and dressing gown and slippers that were laid out for me. The doctor was speaking rapidly into a dictaphone. He gave a brief account of my physical condition and addiction history. The patient seems secure and states his reason for seeking cure is necessity of providing for his family. The guard took me to my ward. "If you want to get off drugs," he said, "this is the place to do it." The ward attendant asked me if I really wanted to get off drugs. I said yes. He signed me to a private room. About 15 minutes later, the attendant called, "Shot line." Everybody in the ward lined up. As our names were called, we put an arm through a window at the door of the ward dispensary, and the attendant gave the shots. Sick as I was, the shot fixed me. Right away, I began to get hungry. I walked up into the middle of the ward where there were benches, chairs, and a radio, and got into a conversation with a thuggish-looking young Italian. He asked me if I had much of a record. I said no. "You ought to be up with the do-rights," he said. "You get a longer cure there and better rooms." The do-rights were people in Lexington for the first time. who were considered to be especially good prospects for a permanent cure. Evidently, the doctor in reception didn't think too much of my prospects. Others drifted out and joined the conversation. The shot had made them feel sociable. First came a Negro from Ohio. "How much time you bringing with you?" the Italian asked him. 3 years, the Negro said. He was in for forging and selling scripts. He began telling about a stretch he did in Ohio State. "That's a fuck of a place to do time. A bunch of kids in there, rough little bastards. You get your stuff at the commissionary and some punk comes up to you and says, 'Give it to me.' If you don't give it to him, he belts you with one in the kisser. Then they all gang up on you. You ain't going to whip all of them." A gambling house dealer from East St. Louis was describing a method for cooking and carbolic acid out of a phenol, sweet oil, and tincture of opium script. "I tell the croaker I've got an aged mother and she uses a prescription for piles. After you get the sweet oil drained off, you put this stuff in a tablespoon and hold it over a gas flame. That burns the phenol right out. It'll hold you 24 hours or so." A handsome, powerfully built man of 40 or so with a tan complexion and iron grey hair was telling how his girl managed to smuggle stuff to him in an orange. So there we were in county, goddamn both of us shitting in our pants like a goose. Hell, when I bit into that orange, it was so bitter. Must have been 15 or 20 grains in it, shot with a hypo. I don't know how she had that much sense. The guard says to me, "Drug addict. Why, you son of a bitch? You mean you're a dope fiend? Well, you'll get no medicine in here. Sweet oil and tincture. The oil floats up to the top and you can draw it off with a dropper. Cooks up back as tar. So I hit Philly sick as a son of a bitch." Well, the croaker says, "Okay, how much do you use?" "Every use powder diluted. Lots of guys kill themselves with it. Almost as much as you can put in the end of a toothpick. The big end, that is, no more. Cook it up and shoot it. On the nod. Loaded. That was back in 33. $28 an ounce. We used to make a pipe out of a bottle and a rubber tube. When we got through smoking, we'd break the bottle. Cook it up and shoot it. On the nod. Sure, you can shoot cocaine in the skin. It hits you right in the stomach. H and coke, you can smell it going on. Like hungry men who can talk about nothing but food. After a while, the shop began to wear off. Conversation slackened. People drifted off to lie down, read or play cards. Lunch was served in the wardroom and there was an excellent meal. There were 3 shots a day, one at 7 a.m. when we got up, one at 1 p.m. and one at 9 p.m. 2 old acquaintances had come in during the afternoons. Maddie and Lewis. I ran into Lewis as we were lining up for the evening shot. Did they get you?" he asked me. "No, just here for the cure. How about you?" "Same with me," he answered. With the evening shot, they gave me some chloral hydrate in a glass. 5 new arrivals were brought up to the ward during the night. The ward attendant threw up his hands. "I don't know where I'm going to put them. I've got 31 dope fiends in here now." Among the new arrivals was a dignified white-haired man of 70 named Bob Reardon, an old-time con man, junk pusher, and pickpocket. He looked the way bankers looked around 1910. He had come with 2 friends in a car. On the way to Lexington, they had called into the Surgeon General in Washington and asked him to wire ahead to the gate that they were coming and should be let right in. They referred to the Surgeon General as Felix and seemed to know him from way back, but only Reardon got in that night. The other 2 drove to a town near Lexington where they knew that croaker to get fixed before they were immobilized for a lack of junk. They both came in about noon the next day. Saul Bloom was a fat man with a heavy Jewish face. Con man stuck out all over him. With him was a little thin man called Bunky. Bunky might have been an old farmer or any dried up skinny old man except for his grey eyes, serene and cold behind steel-rimmed spectacles. These were Reardon's 2 friends. All of them had done a lot of time, mostly federal time for pushing junk. They were affable but maintained a certain reserve. The story they put down was that they really wanted to get off junk because the federals bothered them all the time. As Saul said, "Hell, I love junk and I can get a room full of it, but if I can't use without I get static all the time from the law. I'll get off junk and stay off." He went on talking about some old acquaintances who got their start in junk and later turned respectable. Now they say, "Don't have anything to do with that Saul. He's a schmecker. I don't think they expected anyone to believe the getting off drunk routine. It was just a way of saying, why we came here is our own business. Another new arrival was Abe Green, a long-nosed Jew with one leg. He was almost a ringer for Jimmy Durante. He had pale blue bird-like eyes, even junk-sick, who radiated a fierce vitality. His first night in the ward, he was so sick a doctor came down to examine him and gave him an extra half a grade of morphine. In a few days, he was stumping around the ward talking and playing cards. Green was a well-known pusher from Brooklyn, one of as few independent operators in the business. Most pushers have to work for the syndicate or quit, but Green had so many connections he could stay in business on his own. At the time, he was out on bail, but expected to beat the rap on the grounds of illegal seizure. He, the agent, wakes me up in the middle of the night and starts beating me over the head with his gun. Wants me to give him my connection. I told him, I'm 54 years old and I've never given you guys anything yet. I'll be dead first. Telling about the stretch in Atlanta where he kicked a habit cold. 14 days I was beating my head against the wall and blood came out of my eyes and nose. When the screw came, I'd spit in his face. Coming from him, these narratives had an epic quality. Benny was another old-time Jewish schmecker from New York. He'd been in Lexington 11 times and was in on the bluegrass trip. According to the bluegrass law of Kentucky, any known user of narcotic drugs can be sentenced to the county jail for 1 year, and the alternative of taking the cure is Lexington. He was a short, fat little Jew with a round face. I would never have made Benny for a junk. He had a fair singing voice in a loud way, and his best number was April Showers. One day Benny came into the day room all excited. Moish just checked in, he said. He's a panhandler and a fruit, a disgrace to the Jewish race. But Benny, someone said, he's got a wife and kids. I don't care if he's got 10 kids. He's still a fruit. Moish showed about an hour later. He was a pretty obvious fruit and strictly on the mooch. He was a man almost 60 with smooth pink face and white hair. Matty was all over the ward talking to everybody, asking crude, blunt questions, describing his withdrawal symptoms in detail. He never complained. I don't think he was capable of self-pity. Bob Reardon asked him what he did to get by, and Matty replied, I'm just a dumb fucking thief. He told a story about a drunk asleep on a subway platform bench. I knew he had a roll in his side pocket, but every time I got within 10 feet of him, he'd wake up and say, What do you want? It was easy to see how Matty's vigorous, intrusive emanations would wake up the lush. So I went and found a guy I knew, some old goofball bum. He sat right down by the drunk, and in 20 seconds he had it. He cut the pocket. Why don't you shove him back against the wall and take the money, said Reardon in his good-natured, condescending way. Matty had unlimited brass and there was no uncertainty behind it. He looked completely unlike a drug addict. If a drugstore refused to sell him a needle, he would say, Why don't you sell it to me? Do I look like a dope fiend? The doctor had got Matty on stuff. The Jew bastard, he said. He used to say to me, Matty, you need a little shot, there's no colour. But I made him wish he'd never seen me. I could see a fat old Jewish doctor trying to refuse Matty a shot on credit. Characters like Matty constitute one of the hazards of pushing. They usually have money. When they don't, they expect credit. If you refuse, they will try to strong-arm you. They won't listen to know when they want junk. The cure at Lexington is not designed to keep the addicts comfortable. It starts at 1/4 of a grain of M 3 times a day and lasts 8 days. The preparation now uses synthetic morphine called Dolafine. After 8 days, you get a send-off shot to go over in population. There you receive barbiturates for 3 nights, and that is the end of medication. For a man with a heavy habit, this is a rough schedule. I was lucky in that I came in sick, so the amount given to me the cure was sufficient to fix me. The sicker you are and the longer you have been without junk, the smaller the amount necessary to fix you. When the time came for my send-off shot, I was assigned to Ward B. Skid Row, it was called. There was nothing wrong with the accommodations, but the inmates were a sorry-looking lot. In my section, there was a bunch of old bums with a spit running out of their mouths. You were allowed 7 days to rest in population after the medication stops. Then you have to choose a job and go to work. Lexington has a complete farm and dairy. There is a cannery up to put fruits and vegetables raised on the farm. The inmates run a dental laboratory where they make false teeth, a radio repair service, a library, They serve as janitors, they cook and serve food, they act as assistants to the ward attendants. So there is a wide variety of jobs to select from. I did not figure to stay around long enough to work. After my send-off shot began to wear off, I got sick. Just a shadow of the way I felt when I came in, but bad enough. Even with a sedative, I did not sleep that night. Next day I was worse. I couldn't eat anything, and it was an effort for me to move around. The dolphin suspends the sickness, but when the medication stops, the sickness returns. You don't kick your habit in the shooting gallery, an inmate told me. You kick it over here in population. When the night medication stopped, I checked out, still sick. On a cold, windy afternoon, 5 of us took a cab into Lexington. The thing to do is get right out of Lexington, my companions told me. Go right to the bus station and stay there till your bus leaves. Otherwise, you're liable to get the blue grass. The law was devised, among other things, to protect the doctors and druggists of Kentucky against the importunities of addicts on their way to and from the Lexington narcotics farm. It was also intended to discourage addicts from lingering in the town of Lexington. In Cincinnati, I went around to several drugstores buying 1-ounce bottles of paregoric. 2 ounces of paregoric will fix an addict when his habit is reduced, as mine was at the time. I drank 3 ounces of the paregoric, followed by a little warm water. In about 10 minutes, I could feel the junk take cold, and the sickness was gone. I felt hungry right away and went out of the hotel to eat. Eventually, I got to Texas and stayed off junk for about 4 months. Then I went to New Orleans. New Orleans presents a stratified series of ruins. Along Bourbon streets are ruins of the 1920s. Down where the French Quarter blends into Skid Row are ruins of an earlier stratum. Chilly joints, decaying hotels, old-time saloons with mahogany bars, spittoons and crystal chandeliers. The ruins of 1900s. There are people in New Orleans who have never been outside the city limits. The New Orleans accent is exactly similar to the accent of Brooklyn. The French Quarter is always crowded. Tourists, servicemen, merchant seamen, gamblers, perverts, drifters, and lampsters from every state in the Union. People wander around unrelated, purposeless, and most of them looking vaguely sullen and hostile. This is a place where you can enjoy yourself. Even the criminals have come here to cool off and relax. But a complex pattern of tensions like the electrical mazes devised by psychologists to unhinge the nervous systems of white rats and guinea pigs keeps the unhappy pleasure seekers in a condition of unconsummated alertness. For one thing, New Orleans is inordinately noisy. The drivers orient themselves largely by use of their horns like bats. The residents are surly. The transient population is completely miscellaneous and unrelated, so that you never know what sort of behaviour to expect from anybody. New Orleans was a strange town to me, and I had no way of making a junk connection. Walking around the city, I spotted several junk neighbourhoods: St. Charles and Poitras, the area around and above Lee Circle, Canal and Exchange Place. I don't spot junk neighbourhoods by the way they look, by the way they feel. Somewhat the same process by which a dowser locates hidden water. I'm walking along and suddenly the junk in my cells moves and twitches like a dowser's wand. Junk here. I didn't see anybody around, and besides I wanted to stay off, or at least I thought I wanted to stay off. One night I was in Frank's bar off Exchange Place, drinking a rum and coke. It was an equivocal place. Seamen and longshoremen, queers, dealers from the all-night poker game next door, and some characters who could not be classified. Standing next to me was a middle-aged man with a long, thin face and grey hair. I asked him if he would join me in a beer. He said, I would, but unfortunately I'm not in a condition to reciprocate. Clearly a man who made his living by physical work, self-educated, a terrific bore once he has spotted you as a man of intelligence. I ordered 2 beers and he went on telling me how he was accustomed to reciprocate. When the beers came, he said, shall we find a table where we can discuss the state of the world and the meaning of life without being disturbed? We took our glasses to a table. I was preparing an excuse to leave. The man said suddenly, now, for example, I know you were interested in narcotics. How do you know that? I asked. I know, he said, smiling. I know that you are here to investigate narcotics. I've done a lot of work in that line myself. I've been up to the FBI here 50 times to tell them what I know. You know, of course, how narcotics ties right in with the communism. I shipped out with the C&A last year. That line is communist controlled. The chief engineer was one of them. I spotted him right away. He used to smoke a pipe and light it with a cigarette lighter. He used the lighter to signal. He showed me how the engineer lighted his pipe with a cigarette lighter, and covered and uncovered the lighter to signal. Oh, he was smooth. Signal to whom? I asked. I don't know exactly. There was a place that followed us for a while. I could hear it every time he went out to light his pipe. Let me tell you something that may save you a lot of time. The place to look for the information you want is the Frontier Hotel. The same people that run the Frontier Hotel control the Standish Hotel in Philadelphia. They are in on narcotics and they are connected with communism. Isn't it dangerous for you to talk this way? You don't know who I am. Suppose I was on the other side. I know who I'm talking to, he said. If I didn't, I wouldn't be here. I'd be dead. Out of all the people in this bar, I picked you, didn't I? Yes, but why? There's something that tells me what to do. He showed me a religious medal he wore around his neck. If I didn't carry this, I would have stopped a knife or a bullet a long time ago. Why are you concerned about narcotics? Because I don't like what it does to people. I had a shipmate who used it. Tell me, I said, exactly what is the tie-up between narcotics and communism? You know the answer to that one a lot better than I do. I see you're trying to find out how much I know. All right, the same people are in both narcotics and communism. Right now they control most of America. I'm a seaman. I've been shipping out for 20 years. Who gets the jobs over there in U-Haul? American white men like you and me? No. Dagos and spics and niggers. Why? Because the union controls shipping and communists control the union. I'll be around if you need me, he said, when I got up to leave. In this French Quarter there are several queer bars so full every night the fags spill in out onto the sidewalk. A room full of fags gives me the horrors. They jerk around like puppets on invisible strings, galvanized into hideous activity that is the negation of everything living and spontaneous. The live human being has moved out of those bodies long ago, but something moved in when the original tenant moved out. Fags are ventriloquist dummies who have moved in and taken over the ventriloquist. The dummy sits in a queer bar nursing his beer and uncontrollably yapping out of a rigid doll face. Occasionally we find intact personalities in a queer bar, but fags set the tone of these joints and it always brings me down to go into a queer bar. To bring down piles up. After my first week in a new town, I've about all I can take of these joints, so my bar business goes somewhere else, generally to a bar in or near Skid Row. But I backslide now and then. One night I got lobotomized drunk in Frank's and went to a queer bar. I must have had more drinks in the queer joint because there was a lapse of time. It was getting light outside when the bar hit one of those sudden pockets of quiet. Quiet is something that does not happen often in a queer joint. I guess most of the fags had left. I was leaning against the bar with a beer. I didn't want it in front of me. The noise cleared like smoke and I saw a red-haired kid that was going straight at me, standing about 3 feet away. He didn't come on so faggot, so I said, "How you making it?" or something like that. He said, "Do you want to go to bed with me?" I said, "Okay, let's go." As we walked out, he grabbed a bottle of beer off the bar and stuck it under his coat. Outside it was daylight with the sun just coming up. He staggered through the French Quarter, passing the beer bottle back and forth. He was leading the way in the direction of this hotel, so he said. I could feel my stomach knot up like I was about to take a shot after being off the junk for a long time. I should have been more alert, of course, but I never could mix vigilance and sex. All this time he was talking on in a sexy southern voice, which was not a New Orleans voice, and in daylight he looked good. We got to the hotel and he put me down some routine why he should go in first alone. I pulled some bills out of my pocket. He looked at them and said, "Better give me about 10. I gave it to him. He went into the hotel and came right out. "No rooms there," he said. "We'll try the Savoy." The Savoy was right across the street. "Wait here," he said. I waited about an hour and then it occurred to me what was wrong with the first hotel. It had no back or side door he could walk out of. I walked around to my apartment and got my gun. I waited around the Savoy and looked for the kid through the French Quarter. About noon I got hungry and ate a plate of oysters and a glass of beer. I suddenly felt so tired that when I walked out of the restaurant, my legs were folding under me as if someone were clipping me behind the knees. I took a cab home and fell across the bed without taking off my shoes. I woke up around 6 in the evening and went to Frank's. After 3 quick beers, I felt better. There was a man standing by the jukebox and I caught his eye several times. He looked at me with special recognition, like the one queer looks at another. He looked like one of those in terracotta heads that you plant grass in. A pleasant face, with pleasant intuition, stupidity, shrewdness and malice. The jukebox wasn't working. I walked over and asked him what was wrong with it. He said he didn't know. I asked him to have a drink and he ordered a Coke. He told me his name was Pat. I told him I'd come up recently from the Mexican border. He said, I'd like to get that way down that way, me. Bring some stuff in from Mexico. The border is pretty hot, I said. I hope you won't take offense at what I said, he began. What I say, he began. But you look like you use the stuff yourself. Sure I use. Do you want to score, he asked. I'm due to score in a few minutes. I've been trying to hustle the dough. If you buy me a cap, I can score for you. I said okay. We walked around the corner past the NU Hall. Wait here a minute, he said, disappearing into a bar. I half expected to get beef for my $4, but he was back in a few minutes. Okay, he said, I got it. I asked him to come back to my apartment to take a shot. We went back to my room and I got my outfit that hasn't been used in 5 months. If you don't have a habit, you better go slow with this stuff, he cautioned me. It's pretty strong. I measured out about 2/3 of a cap. Half is plenty, he said. I tell you, it's strong. This'll be all right, I said. But as soon as I took the needle out of the vein, I knew it wasn't all right. I felt a soft blow in the heart. Pat's face began to get black around the edges, the blackness spreading to cover his face. I could feel my eyes roll back in their sockets. I came to several hours later. Pat was gone. I was lying on the bed with my collar loosened. I stood up and fell to my knees. I was dizzy, my head ached. $10 was missing from my watch pocket. I guess he figured I wasn't going to need it anymore. Several days later, I met Pat in the same bar. Holy Jesus, he said. I thought you was dying. I loosened your collar and rubbed ice on your neck. You turned all blue. So I says, holy Jesus, this dying, I'm going to get out of here. Me. A week later, I was hooked. I asked Pat about the possibilities of pushing in New Orleans. The town is out up with pigeons, he said. It's really tough. So I drifted along, scoring through Pat. I stopped drinking, stopped going out at night, and fell into a routine schedule. A cap of junk 3 times a day, and the time between to be filled somehow. Mostly I spent my time painting and working around the house. Manual work makes the time pass fast. Of course, it took me a long time to score. When I first hit New Orleans, the main pusher, or the man, as they say, was a character called Yellow. Yellow was so named because his complexion was yellow and liverish looking. He was a thin little man with a dragging limp. He operated out of a bar near NMU and Hall and occasionally choked down a beer to justify sitting in the bar several hours a day. He was out on bail at the time, and when his case came to trial, he drew 2 years. A period of confusion followed, during which it was difficult to find a score. Sometimes I spent 6 or 8 hours riding around in the car with Pat, waiting and looking for different people he might be holding. Finally, Pat ran into the wholesale connection, $1.50 per cap, no less than 20. This connection was Joe Brandon, one of the few pushers I ever knew who didn't use the stuff himself. Pat and I began pushing in a small way, just enough to keep up our habits. We only took care of people like Pat knew well and was sure of. Dupree was our best customer. He was a dealer in a gambling joint and always had money, but he was a hog for junk, so he couldn't keep his hand out of the till. Eventually he lost the job. Don, an old neighbourhood friend of Pat's, had a city job. He inspected something, but was off half the time sick. He never had money for more than 1 cap, and most of the money he did have was given to him by his sister. Pat told me Don had cancer. Well, I said, I guess he'll die soon. He did. He took to his bed, vomited for a week and died. Seltzer Willie owned a seltzer truck and had a seltzer delivery route. The business bought him 2 caps a day, but he was not really not a very enterprising seltzer pusher. He was a thin, red-haired, mild-mannered man, the type described as harmless. He's timid, said Pat, timid and stupid. There were a few others who dropped by for occasional bang. One was called Whitey. I never found out why, because he was dark, a fattish, stupid man who worked as a waiter in one of the big hotels. He figured that if he paid for one cap, he was entitled to the next cap on credit. Once after Pat turned him down, he rushed to the door in a rage and held up a nickel. "See this nickel," he said. "You're going to be very sorry you turned me down. I'm going to call the police people on you." I told Pat we'd better stop serving Whitey. "Yes," said Pat, "but he knows where I live. We ought to find another place." Another occasional was Lonnie the pimp, who had grown up in his mother's warehouse. Lonnie tried to space his shots so he wouldn't get a habit. He was always beefing at how he couldn't clear anything now. He had to put out so much for hotel rooms, and the law kept him on the move. "See what I mean?" he said. "There's no percentage." Lonnie was a pure pimp. He was skinny and nervous. He couldn't sit still and he couldn't shut up. As he talked, he moved with thin hands which were covered on the backs with long greasy back hairs. You could tell by looking at him that he had a big penis. Pimps always do. Lonnie was a sharp dresser and he drove a Buick convertible, but he wouldn't hesitate to hang us up for credit at a $2 cap. After he took the shot, he'd say, as he rolled down the sleeve of his striped silk shirt and fastened his cufflinks, "Look, boys, I'm a little short. You don't mind putting this one on the cuff, do you? You know I'm good for it." Pat would look at him with his little bloodshot eyes, and a surly peasant look. "For Christ's sake, Lonnie, we have to put out for this stuff. How would you like it if people came in on you, laid your girls, and then wanted to put it on the cuff?" Pat shook his head. "You're like all of them. Once they get it in the vein, that's all they care. Here I have a cool place where they can come and shoot. And what consideration do I get? Once they get it in the vein, that's all they care." "Well, look, Pat, I don't want to hang you up. Now there's $1, and I'll bring the rest this afternoon, okay?" Pat took the $1 and put it in his pocket without saying anything. He pursed his lips in disapproval. Seltzer Willie dropped by around 10 o'clock on his route, took a cab and bought a cab for the night. Dupree came in about 12 when he got off work. He was on the night shift. The others came any time they had the inclination. Bob Brandon, a connection, was out on bail. He was charged in the state county with possession of junk, a felony under Louisiana law. The case against him was based on traces. That is, he got rid of his junk before the cops shook his place down, but he did not wash out the jars in which the junkie had been kept. The federals will not take a traces case, so the state stood in. This is a regular procedure in Louisiana. Any case too shaky for the federal courts passes to the state courts, who will prosecute anything. Brandon expected to beat the case. He had good connections with the political machine, and in any event, the state had a weak case. But the DA dragged in Brandon's record, which included a murder conviction, and he drew 2 to 5 years. Pat found another connection right away, and we went on pushing. A peddler named Jonkers began selling on the corner of Exchange and Canal. Pat lost a few customers to Jonkers. Actually, Jonkers' stuff was better, and sometimes I scored off Jonkers, or Jonkers' partner, an old one-eyed character named Richter. Pat always found out somehow. He was intuitive as a possessive mother, and then he was sulked for about 2 or 3 days. Jonkers and Richter did not last long. Exchange and Canal is one of the hottest spots in New Orleans for junk. One day they were gone, and Pat said, "Now you see some of these guys come back to me," I told Lonnie. "If you want to score off Jonkers, go ahead, but don't come back here and expect me to serve you. You'll see what I tell him if he comes back here." Whitey, too. He's been scoring off Jonkers. Pat gave me a long, sullen look. One day the woman who managed Pat's hotel stopped me in the lobby. "I just want to let you know to be careful," she said. "The cops were here yesterday and made a thorough investigation of Pat's room, and they arrested the boy with the seltzer truck. He's in jail now." I thanked her. A little later, Pat came in. He told me the cops had scrapped Seltzer Willie, as he left the hotel. They didn't find any junk on him, but they took him to the 3rd precinct to hold for investigation. He was there 72 hours, which is the longest period that can hold anyone without placing charges. The cops searched Pat's room, but he kept his junk stashed in the hall, so they didn't find it. Pat said, "They told me, we have information you're running a regular shooting gallery up here. You'd better pack in, because next time we're going to take you, and that's all." "Well," I said, "better pack in, except for Dupree. No harm to serve him." "Dupree lost his job," Pat said. "He's already into it for $20. We were back looking for a score every day. We found out that Lonnie was the man. That is the way it went in New Orleans. You never knew who was going to be the man next. About this time, an anti-narcotics drive hit the town. The chief of police said, "This drive is going to continue as long as there is a single violator left in the city. The state legislators drew up a law making it a crime to be a drug addict. They did not specify where or when or what they meant by drug addict. The cops began stopping addicts on the street and examining their arms for needle marks. If they found marks, they presumed the addict to sign a statement admitting to his condition, so he could be charged under the drug addicts law. The addicts were promised a suspended sentence if they would plead guilty and get the new law started. Addicts ransacked their persons looking for veins to shoot in the outside of the arm area. If the law could find no marks on a man, they usually let him go. If they found marks, they would hold him for 72 hours and try to make him sign a statement. Lonnie's wholesale connection gave out, and a character called Old Sam was the man. Old Sam was after doing 12 years in Angola. He operated in the territory directly above Lee Circle, which is another hotspot in New Orleans for junk or anything.